Section 62 of All About Coffee. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Shireen Hickey. All About Coffee by William Ukers. The Evolution of Coffee Apparatus, Part 2. Chapter 34. The Evolution of Coffee Apparatus. How the commercial coffee roaster was developed, the evolution of filtration devices, the old Carter pull-out roaster, trade customs in New York and St. Louis in the 60s and 70s, the story of the evolution of the Burns roaster, how the gas roaster was developed in France, Great Britain, and the United States. After Carter, the next United States coffee roaster patent was granted to J.R. Remington of Baltimore on a roaster employing a wheel of buckets to move the green coffee beans singly through a charcoal-heated trough. It never became a commercial success. C4, page 630. In 1847-48, William and Elizabeth Dakin were granted patents in England on an apparatus for cleaning and roasting coffee and for making decoctions. The roaster specification covered a gold, silver, platinum, or alloy-lined roasting cylinder and traversing carriage on an overhead railway to move the roaster in and out of the roasting oven. And the decoction specification covered an arrangement for twisting a cloth bag ground coffee container in a coffee biggin, or applied a screw motion to a disc within a perforated cylinder containing the ground coffee, so as to squeeze the liquid out of the grounds after infusion had taken place. The roaster has survived, but the coffee maker was not so fortunate. The Dakin idea was that coffee was injuriously affected by coming in contact with iron during the roasting process. The roasting cylinder was enclosed in an oven instead of being directly exposed to the furnace heat. The apparatus was provided also with a taster, or sampler, the first of its kind, to enable the operator to examine the roasting berries without stopping the machine. As will be seen by referring to the picture of the model shown, the apparatus was ingenious and not without considerable merit. Dakin and Company are still in existence in London, operating a machine very like the original model. In 1848, Thomas John Knowles was granted a patent in England on a perforated roasting cylinder coated with enamel. It is to be noted in passing that this idea of handling the green bean with extreme delicacy, evidently obtained from the French, was never taken seriously in the United States, whose inventors chose to handle it with rough courage. The first English patent on a coffee grinder was granted to Luke Herbert in 1848. In 1849, Apollyon Pierre Preter of Havre was granted an English patent on a coffee roaster mounted on a weighing apparatus to indicate loss of weight in roasting and automatically stop the roasting process. At the same time, he secured an English patent on a vacuum percolator, not unlike Durant's of 1827. In 1849 also, Thomas R. Wood of Cincinnati was granted a United States patent on a spherical coffee roaster for use on kitchen stoves. It attained considerable popularity among housewives who preferred to do their own roasting. C6, page 630. In 1852, Edward G. secured a patent in England on a coffee roaster fitted with inclined flanges for turning the beans while roasting. C. W. Van Vliet of Fishkill Landing, New York, was granted a United States patent in 1855 on a household coffee mill employing upper breaking and lower grinding cones. He assigned it to Charles Parker of Meriden, Connecticut. In 1860-61, several United States patents were granted John and Edmund Parker on coffee grinders for home use. In 1862, E.J. Hyde of Philadelphia was granted a United States patent on a combined coffee roaster and stove fitted with a crane on which the roasting cylinder was revolved and swung out horizontally for emptying and refilling. This machine proved to be a commercial success. Benedict Fisher used one in his first roasting plant in New York. It is still being manufactured by the Bramhall Dean Company of New York. In 1864, Jabez Burns of New York was granted a United States patent on the original Burns coffee roaster, the first machine which did not have to be moved away from the fire for discharging the roasted coffee, and one that marked a distinct advance in the manufacture of coffee roasting apparatus. It was a closed iron cylinder set in brickwork. See illustration, page 635. Jabez Burns had been a student of coffee roasting in New York for 20 years before he produced the machine that was to revolutionize the coffee business of the United States. He had brought with him from England a knowledge of the trade in that country, where he first began his business training by selling Java coffee at 14 cents and Sumatra at 11 cents to hotels, boarding houses, and private families. Up to the time of the Civil War, the contrivances employed for roasting coffee in every case necessitated the removal of the roasting apparatus, whether pan, globe, or cylinder, from the fire. The process of causing coffee to discharge from the end of the roasting cylinder at the pleasure of the operator while the cylinder was still in motion was new, and the double set of flanges to produce this effect, and at the same time during the process of roasting, to keep the coffee equally distributed from end to end of the cylinder, was new. Someone suggested this last improvement was simply an Archimedean screw placed in a cylinder, but Mr. Burns replied, "It is a double screw, a thing never suggested by the Archimedean screw. It is, in fact, a double right and left auger, one within the other, firmly secured together and also to the shell or cylinder, and when the cylinder revolves, the desired result is obtained, the idea being entirely original." Mr. Burns had watched the development of the coffee business from the time when the preparation of coffee was largely confined to the home, where the approved roasting implements were hot stones or tiles, iron plates, skillets, and frying pans. Some of these were still in use 20 years after he produced his first machine, and he often said that coffee evenly roasted by such methods was just as good as if done by the best mechanical device ever invented. He also said, "Coffee can be roasted in very simple machinery. Some of the best we ever saw was done in a corn popper. Patent portable roasters are almost as numerous as rat traps or churns." He early saw the practice of domestic roasting falling into disuse, as it was becoming possible to supply the consumer with roasted coffee for only a trifle more than in the green state, with all the labor and annoyance of roasting done away with, a talking point that John Arbuckle was quick to seize upon in his first Ariosa advertising. In almost every town of any size, there were concerns engaged in the roasting business. Within a few years, Burns machines were placed in all the principal roasting centers. Pupke and Reed in New York, Flint, Evans and Company, and James H. Forbes in St. Louis, Arbuckles and Company in Pittsburgh, the Weichel and Smith Spice Company in Philadelphia, Theodore F. Johnson and Company in Newark, Evans and Walker in Detroit, W. and J. G. Flint in Milwaukee, and Parker and Harrison in Cincinnati were among his first customers. It is said that in 1845 there were facilities in and around New York to roast as much coffee as was then consumed in Great Britain. Steam power was being extensively used, and the roasting was done here for a large part of the country. The habit was to buy roasted coffee from the coffee and spice mills by the bag or larger quantity for country consumption, and the grocers and small tea stores for local consumption bought from 25 pounds upward at a time. This method cheapened the roasting of coffee to half a cent a pound, and then good profits could be made, for everything was cheap in those days. Even at that, it would have been impossible for each tea dealer to have roasted his own coffee for several times the amount, so the practice was generally adhered to all over the country. Jabez Burns wrote in 1874, "It is preposterous to suppose that household roasting will be continued long in any part of this country, if coffee properly prepared can be had. This is demonstrated by the remarkable advances made in Pittsburgh and other places, where only a few years ago the sales were chiefly in green coffee. Now the amount roasted in Pittsburgh alone by those who make a business of it exceeds the entire consumption of coffee of any kind in the United States 50 years ago. It will never pay for small stores to roast, if the large manufactories will do the work well, and if they will not, small dealers will add proper machinery and will eventually become strong, competing dealers. By doing the work with proper care, they will not only secure a reputation with large sales for themselves, but will command the roasting for other parties. Until the Burns roaster appeared, coffee roasters were usually cylinders that revolved upon an axis. The other devices that were tried were not successful. Jabez Burns thus describes the first roaster he ever saw at Hull, England. It consisted of a furnace open at the top and a perforated cylinder with a slide door. The axis or shaft of the cylinder had bearings on a frame which passed outside the furnace, while the cylinder went down into the fire pit, the top of which could be covered over. In this position, it could be turned by means of a crank on the end of a shaft. The only means of testing was by the escape of the steam or aroma, whichever predominated, passing out through the perforations at the top. But so expert was the operator and so quick to detect the aroma that he seldom had to return the cylinder to the fire to produce a satisfactory roast. This man roasted 50 pounds or less in a batch for a number of retail stores. Globes, consisting of 2 hemispheres made of cast iron and so arranged that they opened to fill and discharge, but operated substantially as above, only with the method of lowering into the fire changed somewhat, I have seen in use in Scotland in 1840. They were called French roasters. In this country, a few years ago, the use of the long sheet iron cylinder was almost universal, varying only in the method of placing the cylinder over the fire, some sideways on a track, others endwise, sliding on a long shaft or by turning on a crane, in either case causing considerable labor and loss of time, which often resulted in the hands of the inexperienced and more or less spoiling the batch of coffee. From his expert knowledge of coffee and coffee roasting problems, Jabez Burns quickly rose to a commanding position in the industry. He was a trade teacher and a trade builder. He had very definite ideas on roasting. He said, "The object of roasting is not attained until all the moisture, water of vegetation, is driven off. Roast properly, uniformly and sufficiently, and you will get all the aroma there is in the bean. Coffees of various kinds cannot be roasted to a uniform color. Some will be of a light shade when sufficiently roasted, while others will have to be roasted dark to develop the aroma. Therefore, appearance alone is not a proper test. Aroma-saving devices have had their day. Coffee is of no use unless the aroma is fully developed, and the more it is developed by roasting, the better it is. What passes off in the roasting process cannot be saved, and is so small that if all of it in the country could be collected and freed of all foreign matter, it would not weigh an ounce. Roast coffee over a slow fire, so that it will be an hour before it has the color of roasted coffee, and, in contrast, produce in another batch of like quantity the same color in 30 minutes, and it will be found for all intended purposes, either to grind, sell, or drink, that the latter will be, beyond all comparison, the best. Coffee should be roasted uniform and as quickly as possible. Only it must not be scorched or spotted, otherwise it will have a bitter burned taste. If roasted properly, it will very considerably increase its bulk and will be plump, swelled out and crisp, easily crushed in the hand or between the fingers. In his Spice Mill Companion, published in 1879, Jabez Burns said further in regard to roasting, "All coffees do not roast alike. Some will be a bright light color when done, and others will be dark before done. There are 2 infallible rules which, if properly appreciated and tried, will prove to be practically useful. One is, when the aroma is sufficiently developed to produce a sharp, cutting, but aromatic sensation in the nose. Those who practice that way do not need to see the roast. The other rule is that when a berry is broken, it is crisp and uniform in color inside and out. Those who are accustomed to this method may be good coffee roasters, albeit they may not have any nose at all. But we must state in this connection that a man who has no smell and is colorblind is not a fit candidate for the coffee roasting profession, and moreover, we affirm that any person who cannot roast coffee so far as judgment is concerned, after a few trials will never make a good operator. In 1867, Jabez Burns was granted a United States patent on an improved coffee, cooler, mixer, and grinding mill, or granulator. Another granulator patent was issued to him in 1872. Mr. Burns had also given the subject of cooling coffees considerable study, and his cooler was the result. He argued that it was necessary to cool quickly. Before his day, various methods had been employed, such as placing the coffee in revolving drums covered with wire cloth. Sometimes a draft of cold air was applied to the cooling drums, and the dirt and chaff blown through the wire cloth. It was also customary in wholesale establishments to blow cold air up through a perforated bottom, and this had been found effective when properly applied. The Burns idea was to cool by means of suction, causing a downward draft through the coffee and wire cloth-bottomed box, which was found to be more uniform and efficient for cooling purposes, as well as in controlling smoke, heat, and dust, which, by this means, could be blown out of the roasting room by any convenient outlet. On the subject of grinding, likewise, Mr. Burns had reached some definite conclusions. The French and English lap and wall mills, the English steel mills, and the Swift mills were all used in the United States. Tremner's, the Enterprise, and others, to be mentioned later in chronological order, were extending their use in a retail way, but Jabez Burns confined his attention to a practicable mill for wholesale grinding establishments. For manufacturing purposes, burstone mills were for many years exclusively employed, especially one first known as the Prentice and Page, and later as the Page Mill. There was a time when all the coffee establishments in New York sent their coffee to Prentice and Page to be ground. Some of the places roasted by hand, others by horsepower, and if by steam, it was limited, and they did not have enough to spare for grinding. With the march of improvement, burstone mills went into the discard. The difficulty lay in finding men experienced in stone dressing to run them, and the demand grew for a better style of grinding than could be done in a mill out of face and balance. This demand was met in an altogether different style of machine, which for 25 years was well known as the Barber Mill. It was for improvements on this mill that Jabez Burns, in 1867, 1872, and 1874, obtained his granulator patents. The mill comprised cutters in the form of an iron roller running in near contact with a concave, also of iron, and a revolving cylinder provided with sieves or screens that received the ground material, rolled it over the wire surface, sifting out the fine, and discharging the coarse automatically into the cutter to be again manipulated until it was fine enough to pass through the meshes of the screen. Jabez Burns patented an improved form of his roaster in 1881 and a sample coffee roaster in 1883 before he died in 1888. And since that time, his sons, who continue the business, have perfected a number of improvements and brought out new machines which will be referred to in chronological order. James H. Nason of Franklin, Mass., was granted a United States patent in 1865 on a percolator with fluid joints. P. H. Vanderwade of Philadelphia was granted United States patents in 1866 on a percolator and a continuous coffee filtering machine. Reparlier was granted a French patent on a pocket coffee-making device in 1867. In later years, his invention became very popular among French coffee drinkers. It was one of the early practicable forms of double-glass globe filtration devices. E. B. Manning of Middletown, Connecticut, was granted his first patent on a tea and coffee pot in 1868. Others followed in 1870 and 1876. In the latter year, John Baumann brought out the valve-type percolator, which subsequently attained great favor in American households. Thomas Smith and Son, Elkington and Company Limited, successors, began to manufacture at Glasgow, Scotland, about 1870, the Naperian vacuum coffee machine, which had been invented in 1840, but never patented, by Robert Napier of the celebrated firm of Clyde Shipbuilders. This machine makes coffee by distillation and filtration. It employs a metal globe and a brewer from which the coffee is siphoned over into the globe through a tube, around the strainer end of which, as it rests in the coffee liquid in the brewer, there is tied a filter cloth. It is still being manufactured by Elkington and Company. Napier's vacuum machine, 1840. Thomas Page, a New York millwright, began the manufacture of a pull-out coffee roaster similar to the old Carter machine in 1868. Later, Chris Abiel, who was foreman in the Page shop, succeeded to the business, and in 1882 he was granted a United States patent on an improvement on a coffee roaster similar to the original Burns machine. The patent had then expired, which he marketed under the name of Knickerbocker. German coffee machinery. The Germans first began to show an active interest in coffee machinery in 1860. In that year, Alexius von Gulpen of Emmerich produced a green coffee grater, and later, 1868, in partnership with J. H. Lensing and Theodor von Gimborn, began the manufacture of coffee roasting machines. From this start, there developed in Emmerich quite an industry in coffee machinery building. In 1870, Alexius von Gulpen introduced to the German trade a globular coffee roaster employing wood and coke as fuel and having perforations and an exhauster. Van Gulpen and von Gimborn are the two names most often met with in the development of German coffee roasting machinery. The first recorded German patent on a coffee roaster was issued to G. Tuberman's son in 1877 for a coffee burner with vertically adjusted stirring works. German patents were issued in 1878 to R. Mulberg of Tausche for coffee roasters with movable partitions and screw-shaped declining walls. 6 roaster patents were issued to other inventors in 1878 to 79. Peter Pearson of Manchester took out a German patent on a coffee roasting apparatus in 1880. Fleury and Barker of London were granted a coffee roaster patent in Germany in 1881. After 1870, Van Gulpen devoted himself to the cylinder type of roaster, on which he obtained several patents. The partnership between Messrs. Van Gulpen, Lensing, and von Gimborn was dissolved in 1906. They were succeeded by the Emmericher Maschinenfabrik und Eisengießerei and Van Gulpen and Company. Van Gulpen died in 1920. Among his inventions were a circular air fan to supply fresh air to the beans while roasting, a fire-dampening device, roasting and cooling exhausters, and a withdrawable mixer remaining inside the cylinder during the roasting process, but designed to be withdrawn at the end, discharging the contents with a jerk into a circular cooler. These improvements are featured in Von Gulpen and Company's latest Meteor machine. They make also the Typhoon and Comet machines and a line of globular roasters. A dozen coffee roaster patents were issued in Germany in 1880 to 82. Among them was one to the Emmerich Machine Factory and Iron Foundry. Von Gulpen, Lensing, and von Gimborn, Emmerich, in 1882. Numerous coffee cooling, coffee grinding, and coffee-making devices were patented in Germany from 1877 to 1885. Among them, Neustadt's coffee extract machine in 1882, safety attachments, rapid filters, Vienna coffee makers, etc. The first Vienna coffee maker seems to have been patented in Germany in 1879. The Emmerich Machine Factory and Iron Foundry acquired certain Danish and Austrian coffee roaster patents in 1881, and in 1892 it was granted a German patent on a ball roaster. In the 80s, this concern began the manufacture of a closed ball, or globular, roaster with gas heater attachment. It acquired, in 1889, the rights for Germany to manufacture gas roasters under the Dutch Henneman patents of 1888. In 1892, Theodor von Gimborn was granted French and English patents on a coffee roaster employing a naked gas flame in a rotary cylinder. In 1897, The Emmericher concern was granted a German patent on an automatic circular tipping cooler with power drive. Today, this factory features the Probat and Perfect roasters, but manufactures a general line of cylinder and ball machines for coal, coke, and gas. Among others engaged in the manufacture of coffee machines in Germany are G. W. Barth, Ludwigsburg, and Ferd Gotthard Mulheim on Ruhr. The latter manufactures a coke or gas-heated quick roaster known as the Ideal Rapid, and a smaller hand power machine of the same type called Favor. In 1869, Elie Monneuse and L. Duparquet of New York were granted 3 United States patents on a coffee pot or urn made of sheet copper and lined with pure sheet block tin. These patents were the foundation of the successful coffee urn business afterward built up under the name of the Duparquet, Huot, and Monneuse Company. Thomas Smith & Son, Elkington & Company Limited, successors, began in 1870 the manufacture of the Napierian coffee-making machine at Glasgow, Scotland. This was a device for making coffee by distillation, employing a metal globe siphon and brewer with filter cloth. The principle was subsequently used in the Napier List steam coffee machine for ships and institutions, patented in England in 1891. John Gulick Baker of Philadelphia, one of the founders of the Enterprise Manufacturing Company of Pennsylvania, was granted a United States patent in 1870 on a coffee grinder introduced to the trade as the Enterprise Champion No. 1 store mill. Another Baker patent was granted in 1873, and this became known as the Enterprise Champion Globe No. 0. These mills were the pioneer machines for store use. In 1870, Delphine, sister of Maroumet, France, was granted a French patent on a tubular coffee roaster which turned over a flame. In the 60s and 70s, French inventors became quite active on coffee roaster improvements. Many patents were granted, and quite a few were for practical, small-capacity machines that have survived and are in use today in France and on the continent. Some supplied inspiration for inventors in neighboring countries. Among the more notable names, mention should be made of Martin of Saint-Quentin, who produced a sheet iron cylinder roaster with interior gatherer in 1860, Marchand of Paris, fan roaster with movable firebox, 1866 and 1869, Lausanne, Paris, rocking system of roasting coffee in a round stove, 1873, Idles glass sphere, Lyon, 1874, and Marchand and Ignette, Paris, 1877, a ball coffee roaster. Evolution of the gas roaster. According to the patent records, Ruhr of Marseille appears to have produced the original gas coffee roaster in 1877. The evolution of the gas roasting machine was as follows. In 1879, H. Falder of Stockport, England, obtained an English patent on an external air blast burner applied to a cylinder gas machine, which is still being manufactured by the Grocers, Engineering and Whitney Limited of London. Fleury and Barker of London followed with another English gas machine in 1880, the heat being supplied from gas jets over the roasting cylinder. In 1881, Peter Pearson of Manchester produced a gas roaster which consisted of a wire gauze cylinder revolving under a metal plate heated by gas. Beeston Tupholme of London was granted an English patent in 1887 on a direct flame gas roaster, which he assigned to Joseph Baker and Sons. Karel F. Henneman, The Hague, Netherlands, took out his first patent on the Henneman direct flame gas roaster in Spain in 1888, and the following year he obtained patents in Belgium, France, and England. His United States patents were granted in 1893 to 95. Postulart secured a patent in France for a gas coffee roaster in 1888. The Germans also began, in the 80s, to take the quick gas coffee roaster seriously. In 1889, Carl Alexander Otto of Dresden secured a German patent on a spiral, tubular machine to roast coffee in 3.5 minutes. It was first manufactured and sold by Max Thermer of Dresden in 1891-93. The subject of quick roasting has greatly agitated German and French coffee men. Otto found that coffee roasted in small quantities, say 50 grams, on a sample roaster produced a finer flavor and aroma than that roasted in the big machines. He set out to produce a machine that would roast continuous, small quantities in the shortest time. He built the first commercial machine under his patent in 1893. It was shown at the International Food Exhibition in Dresden in 1894. The latest type manufactured by Max Thermer, Dresden, in which firm Otto is a partner, has a spiral 5 meters long and an hourly production of about 450 pounds. The Thermer machine, as it is called, has been sold to the trade since 1914. Quick roasting is gone in for quite extensively in Germany, even in the big trade roasting plants, where machines to roast in 10 to 17 minutes are common. Natural, slow cooling is most necessary with quick roasting, according to Thermer. On the other hand, A. Mouton of Paris, who also manufactures a line of quick gas roasting machines called Magic, argues that quick cooling is essential after quick roasting. 3 of the Mouton machines are illustrated on pages 642 and 644. Other quick roasting machines of German make are the Combinator, Tornado, and Record. In a lecture before the Society of Medical Officers of Health, London, October 24, 1912, William Lawton demonstrated to the satisfaction of his audience that coffee could be roasted in 3 minutes using a perforated gas roaster of his own invention. The first direct-flame gas coffee roaster in America was installed in the plant of the Potter Parlin Company, New York, by F.T. Holmes in 1893. This was Tupholme's machine, patented in England in 1887 and in the United States in 1896-97. The Potter Parlin Company subsequently placed the Tupholme machines throughout the United States on a daily rental basis, limiting its leases to one firm in a city, having obtained the exclusive American rights from the Waygood Tupholme Company, now the Grocers Engineering and Whitney Limited. Natural gas was first used in the United States as fuel for roasting coffee in 1896, when it was introduced under coal roasting cylinders in Pennsylvania and Indiana by improvised gas burners. Edwin Crawley and W.T. Johnston, Newport, Kentucky, assigners to the Potter Parlin Company, New York, were granted 4 United States patents on gas coffee roasting machines. In 1897, a special gas burner, not to be confused with a direct flame machine, was first attached to a regular Burns roaster in the United States and was made the basis of application for a patent. In 1897-99, David B. Fraser of New York began to market in the United States a central heated gas fuel machine with an inner wire cloth cylinder to keep the coffee from dropping into the flame. Developed under United States patents granted to Carl H. During of Hoboken in 1897 and to D.B. Fraser in 1899. M.F. Hamsley of Brooklyn was granted a United States patent on an improved direct flame gas roaster in 1898. Ellis M. Potter, New York, was granted in 1899 a United States patent on an improved direct flame gas roaster in which the flame was spread over a large area to avoid scorching and to ensure a more thorough and uniform roast. In the Tupholme machine, the gas flame entered at one end, and the smoke and flame went out through a stack on top. In the Potter machine, the stack was put on the end opposite the gas intake, with a fan to pull the flame all the way through. The Burns Direct Flame gas roaster with patented swing gate head for feeding and discharging was introduced to the trade in 1900. The Burns gas sample roaster followed. In 1901, Joseph Lambert of Marshall, Michigan, introduced to the trade one of the earliest indirect gas roasting machines. In 1901, also, T.C. Morwood of Brentford, England, was granted an English patent on a gas roaster fitted with a sliding burner and a removable sampling tube. This machine is now being made by the Grocers Engineering and Whitney Limited. In the same year, 1901, F.T. Holmes, formerly with the Potter Parlin Company, joined the Huntley Manufacturing Company, Silver Creek, New York, which then began to build the Monitor Direct Flame Gas Coffee Roaster. Mr. Holmes still further improved the Tupholme idea by putting gas burners in both ends of the roasting cylinder, with the pipes bent down so as to cause the gas flame to go first to the bottom and then up to the stack on top. This improvement was never patented. The Henneman Direct Flame Gas Roaster was introduced to the United States trade in 1905 by C.A. Cross & Company, wholesale grocers of Fitchburg, Mass. It was marketed here 7 years, but was never a great success. In 1906, F.T. Holmes was granted a United States patent on a coffee roaster which he assigned to the Huntley Manufacturing Company. J.C. Prims of Battle Creek, Michigan, was granted a United States patent in 1908 on a corrugated cylinder improvement for a gas and coal roaster designed for retail stores. The A.J. Deere Company, Hornell, New York, acquired this machine in 1909 and began to market it as the Royal Coffee Roaster. An improvement patented in 1915 by J.C. Prims was assigned to the A.J. Deere Company. In 1915 and again in 1919, Jabez Burns & Sons, New York, patented their Jubilee Roaster, an inner heated machine in which the gas is burned inside a revolving cylinder in a combustion chamber protected from direct coffee contact. The heat is deflected downward and then passes upward through the coffee. In 1919, William Fullard, died 1921, of Philadelphia, was granted a United States patent on a heated fresh air system roaster in which the fresh air is forced by an electric fan through a pipe to a set of coils over gas, coal, or oil flame. At the top of the coils is a manifold, the hot air being forced through small holes to circulate in and around a regulation perforated roasting cylinder. The vapors and spent air are then drawn into an overhead exhaust pipe that connects with a pipe provided with a fresh air intake, the idea being to return them to the roasting cylinder after being mixed with fresh air and heated in the coils as before. This patent has not been successfully marketed at the time of writing. The purpose is to roast by heated air not mixed with any furnace gases. Whether this can be done with sufficient fuel economy and whether coffee thus roasted would have any greater value are questions that are raised by the coffee experts. End of section 62.